Chapter 77. Haydée. Scarcely had the Count's horses cleared the angle of the boulevard than Albert, turning towards the Count, burst into a loud fit of laughter, much too loud, in fact, not to give the idea of its being rather forced and unnatural. "Well," said he, "I will ask you the same question which Charles IX put to Catherine de' Medici after the massacre of St. Bartholomew. How have I played my little part?" "To what do you allude?" asked Monte Cristo. "To the installation of my rival at Monsieur Danglars." "What rival?" "Ma foi, what rival? Why, your protégé, Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti." "Ah, no joking, Viscount, if you please. I do not patronize Monsieur Andrea, at least not as concerns Monsieur Danglars." "And you would be to blame for not assisting him, if the young man really needed your help in that quarter, but, happily for me, he can dispense with it." "What? Do you think he is paying his addresses?" "I am certain of it. His languishing looks and modulated tones when addressing Mademoiselle Danglars fully proclaim his intentions. He aspires to the hand of the proud Eugénie." "What does that signify, so long as they favour your suit?" "But it is not the case, my dear Count. On the contrary, I am repulsed on all sides." "What?" "It is so, indeed. Mademoiselle Eugénie scarcely answers me, and Mademoiselle d'Armilly, her confidante, does not speak to me at all." "But the father has the greatest regard possible for you," said Monte Cristo. "He? Oh, no, he has plunged 1,000 daggers into my heart, tragedy weapons, I own, which, instead of wounding, sheath their points in their own handles, but daggers which he nevertheless believed to be real and deadly." "Jealousy indicates affection." "True, but I am not jealous." "He is." "Of whom? Of Debray?" "No, of you." "Of me? I will engage to say that before a week is past, the door will be closed against me." "You are mistaken, my dear Viscount." "Prove it to me." "Do you wish me to do so?" "Yes." "Well, I am charged with the commission of endeavouring to induce the Comte de Morcerf to make some definite arrangement with the Baron." "By whom are you charged?" "By the Baron himself." "Oh," said Albert, with all the cajolery of which he was capable. "You surely will not do that, my dear Count?" "Certainly I shall, Albert, as I have promised to do it." "Well," said Albert with a sigh, "it seems you are determined to marry me." "I am determined to try and be on good terms with everybody, at all events," said Monte Cristo. "But, apropos of Debray, how is it that I have not seen him lately at the Baron's house?" "There has been some misunderstanding." "What, with the Baroness?" "No, with the Baron." "Has he perceived anything?" "Ah, that is a good joke." "Do you think he suspects?" said Monte Cristo with charming artlessness. "Where have you come from, my dear Count?" said Albert. "From Congo, if you will." "It must be farther off than even that." "But what do I know of your Parisian husbands?" "Oh, my dear Count, husbands are pretty much the same everywhere. An individual husband of any country is a pretty fair specimen of the whole race." "But then, what can have led to the quarrel between Danglars and Debray? They seem to understand each other so well," said Monte Cristo with renewed energy. "Ah, now you are trying to penetrate into the mysteries of Isis, in which I am not initiated. When Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti has become one of the family, you can ask him that question." The carriage stopped. "Here we are," said Monte Cristo. "It is only 10:30. Come in." "Certainly, I will." "My carriage shall take you back." "No, thank you. I have given orders for my coupe to follow me." "There it is, then," said Monte Cristo as he stepped out of the carriage. They both went into the house. The drawing-room was lighted up. They went in there. "You will make tea for us, Baptistine," said the Count. Baptistine left the room without waiting to answer, and in 2 seconds reappeared, bringing on a waiter all that his master had ordered, ready prepared, and appearing to have sprung from the ground, like the repast which we read of in fairy tales. "Really, my dear Count," said Morcerf, "what I admire in you is, not so much your riches, for perhaps there are people even wealthier than yourself, nor is it only your wit, for Beaumarchais might have possessed as much, but it is your manner of being served, without questions, in a moment, in a second. It is as if they guessed what you wanted by your manner of ringing, and made a point of keeping everything you could possibly desire in constant readiness. What you say is perhaps true. They know my habits. For instance, you shall see. How do you wish to occupy yourself during tea-time?" "Ma foi, I should like to smoke." Monte Cristo took the gong and struck it once. In about the space of a second a private door opened, and Ali appeared, bringing 2 chibouques filled with excellent latakia. "It is quite wonderful," said Albert. "Oh, no, it is as simple as possible," replied Monte Cristo. "Ali knows I generally smoke while I am taking my tea or coffee. He has heard that I ordered tea, and he also knows that I brought you home with me. When I summoned him, he naturally guessed the reason of my doing so, and as he comes from a country where hospitality is especially manifested through the medium of smoking, he naturally concludes that we shall smoke in company, and therefore brings 2 chibouques instead of 1. And now the mystery is solved." "Certainly you give a most commonplace air to your explanation, but it is not the less true that you—" "Ah, but what do I hear?" And Morcerf inclined his head towards the door, through which sounds seemed to issue resembling those of a guitar. "Ma foi, my dear Viscount, you are fated to hear music this evening. You have only escaped from Mademoiselle Danglars' piano to be attacked by Haydée's guzla." "Haydée, what an adorable name! Are there then really women who bear the name of Haydée anywhere but in Byron's poems?" "Certainly there are. Haydée is a very uncommon name in France, but is common enough in Albania and Epirus. It is as if you said, for example, chastity, modesty, innocence. It is a kind of baptismal name, as you Parisians call it." "Oh, that is charming," said Albert. "How I should like to hear my countrywomen called Mademoiselle Goodness, Mademoiselle Silence, Mademoiselle Christian Charity. Only think, then, if Mademoiselle Danglars, instead of being called Claire Marie Eugénie, had been named Mademoiselle Chastity, Modesty, Innocence Danglars. What a fine effect that would have produced on the announcement of her marriage!" "Hush," said the Count. "Do not joke in so loud a tone. Haydée may hear you, perhaps." "And do you think she would be angry?" "No, certainly not," said the Count with a haughty expression. "She is very amiable, then, is she not?" said Albert. "It is not to be called amiability, it is her duty. A slave does not dictate to a master." "Come, you are joking yourself now. Are there any more slaves to be had who bear this beautiful name?" "Undoubtedly." "Really, Count, you do nothing and have nothing like other people. The slave of the Count of Monte Cristo. Why, it is a rank of itself in France, and from the way in which you lavish money, it is a place that must be worth 100,000 francs a year." 100,000 francs? The poor girl originally possessed much more than that. She was born to treasures in comparison with which those recorded in the 1001 Nights would seem but poverty. She must be a princess, then. You are right, and she is one of the greatest in her country, too." "I thought so. But how did it happen that such a great princess became a slave?" "How was it that Dionysius the tyrant became a schoolmaster? The fortune of war, my dear Viscount, the caprice of fortune. That is the way in which these things are to be accounted for." "And is her name a secret?" "As regards the generality of mankind, it is, but not for you, my dear Viscount, who are one of my most intimate friends, and on whose silence I feel I may rely, if I consider it necessary to enjoin it. May I not do so?" "Certainly, on my word of honor." You know the history of the Pasha of Yanina, do you not? "Of Ali Tepelini? Oh, yes. It was in his service that my father made his fortune." "True, I had forgotten that." "Well, what is Haydée to Ali Tepelini?" "Merely his daughter." "What? The daughter of Ali Pasha?" "Of Ali Pasha and the beautiful Vasiliki." "And your slave?" "Ma foi, yes." "But how did she become so?" "Why, simply from the circumstance of my having bought her one day, as I was passing through the market at Constantinople." "Wonderful! Really, my dear Count, you seem to throw a sort of magic influence over all in which you are concerned. When I listen to you, existence no longer seems reality, but a waking dream. Now, I am perhaps going to make an imprudent and thoughtless request, but— Say on. But since you go out with Haydée, and sometimes even take her to the opera— Well, I think I may venture to ask you this favor." "You may venture to ask me anything." "Well then, my dear Count, present me to your princess." "I will do so, but on 2 conditions." "I accept them at once." "The first is, that you will never tell anyone that I have granted the interview." "Very well," said Albert, extending his hand. "I swear I will not." "The second is that you will not tell her that your father ever served hers." "I give you my oath that I will not." "Enough, Viscount. You will remember those 2 vows, will you not? But I know you to be a man of honor." The Count again struck the gong. Ali reappeared. "Tell Haydée," said he, "that I will take coffee with her, and give her to understand that I desire permission to present one of my friends to her." Ali bowed and left the room. "Now understand me," said the Count. "No direct questions, my dear Morcerf. If you wish to know anything, tell me, and I will ask her." "Agreed." Ali reappeared for the 3rd time, and drew back the tapestried hanging which concealed the door to signify to his master and Albert that they were at liberty to pass on. "Let us go in," said Monte Cristo. Albert passed his hand through his hair and curled his moustache, then, having satisfied himself as to his personal appearance, followed the Count into the room, the latter having previously resumed his hat and gloves. Ali was stationed as a kind of advanced guard, and the door was kept by 3 French attendants, commanded by Myrtho. Haydée was awaiting her visitors in the first room of her apartments, which was the drawing-room. Her large eyes were dilated with surprise and expectation, for it was the first time that any man, except Monte Cristo, had been accorded an entrance into her presence. She was sitting on a sofa placed in an angle of the room, with her legs crossed under her in the Eastern fashion, and seemed to have made for herself, as it were, a kind of nest in the rich Indian silks which enveloped her. Near her was the instrument on which she had just been playing. It was elegantly fashioned, and worthy of its mistress. On perceiving Monte Cristo, she arose and welcomed him with a smile peculiar to herself, expressive at once of the most implicit obedience and also of the deepest love. Monte Cristo advanced towards her and extended his hand, which she, as usual, raised to her lips. Albert had proceeded no farther than the door, where he remained rooted to the spot, being completely fascinated by the sight of such surpassing beauty, beheld as it was for the first time, and of which an inhabitant of more northern climes could form no adequate idea. "Whom do you bring?" asked the young girl in Romaic of Monte Cristo. "Is it a friend, a brother, a simple acquaintance, or an enemy?" "A friend," said Monte Cristo in the same language. "What is his name?" "Count Albert. It is the same man whom I rescued from the hands of the banditti at Rome." "In what language would you like me to converse with him?" Monte Cristo turned to Albert. "Do you know modern Greek?" asked he. "Alas, no," said Albert, "nor even ancient Greek, my dear Count. Never had Homer or Plato a more unworthy scholar than myself." "Then," said Haydée, proving by her remark that she had quite understood Monte Cristo's question and Albert's answer, "then I will speak either in French or Italian, if my lord so wills it." Monte Cristo reflected one instant. "You will speak in Italian," said he. Then, turning towards Albert, "It is a pity you do not understand either ancient or modern Greek, both of which Haydée speaks so fluently. The poor child will be obliged to talk to you in Italian, which will give you but a very false idea of her powers of conversation." The Count made a sign to Haydée to address his visitor. "Sir," she said to Morcerf, "you are most welcome as the friend of my lord and master." This was said in excellent Tuscan, and with that soft Roman accent which makes the language of Dante as sonorous as that of Homer. Then, turning to Ali, she directed him to bring coffee and pipes, and when he had left the room to execute the orders of his young mistress, she beckoned Albert to approach nearer to her. Monte Cristo and Morcerf drew their seats towards a small table, on which were arranged music, drawings, and vases of flowers. Ali then entered bringing coffee and chibouques. As to Monsieur Baptistine, this portion of the building was interdicted to him. Albert refused the pipe which the Nubian offered him. "Oh, take it, said the Count. "Haydée is almost as civilized as a Parisian. The smell of an Havana is disagreeable to her, but the tobacco of the East is a most delicious perfume, you know." Ali left the room. The cups of coffee were all prepared, with the addition of sugar, which had been brought for Albert. Monte Cristo and Haydée took the beverage in the original Arabian manner, that is to say, without sugar. Haydée took the porcelain cup in her little slender fingers and conveyed it to her mouth with all the innocent artlessness of a child when eating or drinking something which it likes. At this moment 2 women entered, bringing salvers filled with ices and sherbet, which they placed on 2 small tables appropriated to that purpose. "My dear host, and you, Signora," said Albert in Italian, "excuse my apparent stupidity. I am quite bewildered, and it is natural that it should be so. Here I am in the heart of Paris, but a moment ago I heard the rumbling of the omnibuses and the tinkling of the bells of the lemonade sellers, and now I feel as if I were suddenly transported to the East, not such as I have seen it, but such as my dreams have painted it. Oh, Signora, if I could but speak Greek, your conversation, added to the fairy scene which surrounds me, would furnish an evening of such delight as it would be impossible for me ever to forget." "I speak sufficient Italian to enable me to converse with you, sir," said Haydée quietly, "and if you like what is Eastern, I will do my best to secure the gratification of your tastes while you are here." "On what subject shall I converse with her?" said Albert in a low tone to Monte Cristo. "Just what you please. You may speak of her country and of her youthful reminiscences, or, if you like it better, you can talk of Rome, Naples, or Florence." "Oh," said Albert, It is of no use to be in the company of a Greek if one converses just in the same style as with a Parisian. Let me speak to her of the East." "Do so, then, for of all themes which you could choose, that would be the most agreeable to her taste." Albert turned towards Haydée. "At what age did you leave Greece, Signora?" asked he. "I left it when I was but 5 years old," replied Haydée. "And have you any recollections of your country?" "When I shut my eyes and think, I seem to see it all again. The mind can see as well as the body. The body forgets sometimes, but the mind never forgets." "And how far back into the past do your recollections extend?" "I could scarcely walk when my mother, who was called Vasiliki, which means royal," said the young girl, tossing her head proudly, "took me by the hand, and after putting in our purse all the money we possessed, we went out, both covered with veils, to solicit alms for the prisoners, saying, 'He who giveth to the poor lendeth to the Lord.' Then, when our purse was full, we returned to the palace, and without saying a word to my father, we sent it to the convent, where it was divided amongst the prisoners." "And how old were you at that time?" "I was 3 years old," said Haydée. "Then you remember everything that went on about you from the time when you were 3 years old?" said Albert. "Everything." "Count," said Albert in a low tone to Monte Cristo, "do allow the Signora to tell me something of her history. You prohibited my mentioning my father's name to her, but perhaps she will allude to him of her own accord in the course of her recital, and you have no idea how delighted I should be to hear our name pronounced by such beautiful lips." Monte Cristo turned to Haydée, and with an expression of countenance which commanded her to pay the most implicit attention to his words, he said in Greek, "Tell the fate of your father, but neither the name of the traitor nor the treason." Haydée sighed deeply, and a shade of sadness clouded her beautiful brow. "What are you saying to her?" said Morcerf in an undertone. "I again reminded her that you were a friend, and that she need not conceal anything from you." "Then," said Albert, "this pious pilgrimage in behalf of the prisoners was your first remembrance. What is the next?" "Oh, then I remember as if it were but yesterday, sitting under the shade of some sycamore trees, on the borders of a lake, in the waters of which the trembling foliage was reflected as in a mirror. Under the oldest and thickest of these trees, reclining on cushions, sat my father. My mother was at his feet, and I, childlike, amused myself by playing with his long white beard, which descended to his girdle, or with the diamond hilt of the scimitar attached to his girdle. Then, from time to time, there came to him an Albanian, who said something to which I paid no attention, but which he always answered in the same tone of voice, either 'kill' or 'pardon.'" "It is very strange," said Albert, "to hear such words proceed from the mouth of anyone but an actress on the stage, and one needs constantly to be saying to oneself, 'This is no fiction, it is all reality,' in order to believe it. And how does France appear in your eyes, accustomed as they have been to gaze on such enchanted scenes?" "I think it is a fine country," said Haydée, "but I see France as it really is, because I look on it with the eyes of a woman; whereas my own country, which I can only judge of from the impression produced on my childish mind, always seems enveloped in a vague atmosphere, which is luminous or otherwise, according as my remembrances of it are sad or joyous." "So young," said Albert, forgetting at the moment the Count's command that he should ask no questions of the slave herself. "Is it possible that you could have known what suffering is, except by name?" Haydée turned her eyes towards Monte Cristo, who, making at the same time some imperceptible sign, murmured, "Go on." Nothing is ever so firmly impressed on the mind as the memory of our early childhood, and with the exception of the two scenes I have just described to you, all my earliest reminiscences are fraught with deepest sadness. "Speak, speak, signora," said Albert. "I am listening with the most intense delight and interest to all you say." Haydée answered his remark with a melancholy smile. "You wish me, then, to relate the history of my past sorrows?" said she. "I beg you to do so," replied Albert. "Well, I was but 4 years old when one night I was suddenly awakened by my mother. We were in the palace of Yanina. She snatched me from the cushions on which I was sleeping, and, on opening my eyes, I saw hers filled with tears. She took me away without speaking. When I saw her weeping, I began to cry too. 'Hush, child,' said she. At other times, in spite of maternal endearments or threats, I had with a child's caprice been accustomed to indulge my feelings of sorrow or anger by crying as much as I felt inclined, but on this occasion there was an intonation of such extreme terror in my mother's voice when she enjoined me to silence, that I ceased crying as soon as her command was given. She bore me rapidly away. I saw then that we were descending a large staircase. Around us were all my mother's servants, carrying trunks, bags, ornaments, jewels, purses of gold, with which they were hurrying away in the greatest distraction. Behind the women came a guard of 20 men, armed with long guns and pistols, and dressed in the costume which the Greeks have assumed since they have again become a nation. "You may imagine there was something startling and ominous," said Haydée, shaking her head and turning pale at the mere remembrance of the scene, "in this long file of slaves and women only half aroused from sleep, or at least so they appeared to me, who was myself scarcely awake. Here and there on the walls of the staircase were reflected gigantic shadows, which trembled in the flickering light of the pine torches till they seemed to reach the vaulted roof above. "Quick!" said a voice at the end of the gallery. This voice made every one bow before it, resembling in its effect the wind passing over a field of wheat, by its superior strength forcing every ear to yield obeisance. As for me, it made me tremble. This voice was that of my father. He came last, clothed in his splendid robes, and holding in his hand the carbine which your emperor presented him. He was leaning on the shoulder of his favourite, Selim, and he drove us all before him, as a shepherd would his straggling flock. "My father," said Haydée, raising her head, "was that illustrious man, known in Europe under the name of Ali Tepelini, Pasha of Yanina, and before whom Turkey trembled." Albert, without knowing why, started on hearing these words pronounced with such a haughty and dignified accent. It appeared to him as if there was something supernaturally gloomy and terrible in the expression which gleamed from the brilliant eyes of Haydée at this moment. She appeared like a pythoness evoking a spectre, as she recalled to his mind the remembrance of the fearful death of this man, to the news of which all Europe had listened with horror. "Soon," said Haydée, "we halted on our march, and found ourselves on the borders of a lake. My mother pressed me to her throbbing heart, and at the distance of a few paces I saw my father, who was glancing anxiously around. 4 marble steps led down to the water's edge, and below them was a boat floating on the tide. From where we stood, I could see in the middle of the lake a large blank mass. It was the kiosk to which we were going. This kiosk appeared to me to be at a considerable distance, perhaps on account of the darkness of the night, which prevented any object from being more than partially discerned. We stepped into the boat. I remember well that the oars made no noise whatever in striking the water, and when I leaned over to ascertain the cause, I saw that they were muffled with the sashes of our palanquins. Besides the rowers, The boat contained only the women, my father, mother, Selim, and myself. The Pallicares had remained on the shore of the lake, ready to cover our retreat. They were kneeling on the lowest of the marble steps, and in that manner intended making a rampart of the three others, in case of pursuit. Our bark flew before the wind. "Why does the boat go so fast?" asked I of my mother. "Silence, child! Hush! We are flying!" I did not understand. Why should my father fly? He, the all-powerful, he before whom others were accustomed to fly. He who had taken for his device, "They hate me, then they fear me." It was, indeed, a flight which my father was trying to effect. I have been told since that the garrison of the castle of Yanina fatigued with long service. Here Haydée cast a significant glance at Monte Cristo, whose eyes had been riveted on her countenance during the whole course of her narrative. The young girl then continued, speaking slowly, like a person who is either inventing or suppressing some feature of the history which he is relating. "You were saying, Signora," said Albert, who was paying the most implicit attention to the recital, "that the garrison of Yanina, fatigued with long service, had treated with the Seraskier Khurshid, who had been sent by the Sultan to gain possession of the person of my father. It was then that Ali Tepelini, after having sent to the Sultan a French officer in which he reposed great confidence, resolved to retire to the asylum which he had long before prepared for himself, and which he called Cadafigian, or the Refuge." "And this officer," said Albert, "do you remember his name, Signora?" Monte Cristo exchanged a rapid glance with the young girl, which was quite unperceived by Albert. "No," said she, "I do not remember it just at this moment, but if it should occur to me presently, I will tell you." Albert was on the point of pronouncing his father's name, when Monte Cristo gently held up his finger in token of reproach. The young man recollected his promise, and was silent. It was towards this kiosk that we were rowing. A ground floor, ornamented with arabesques, bathing its terraces in the water, and another floor, looking on the lake, was all which was visible to the eye. But beneath the ground floor, stretching out into the island, was a large subterranean cavern, to which my mother, myself, and the women were conducted. In this place were together 60,000 pouches and 200 barrels. The pouches contained 25 million of money in gold, and the barrels were filled with 30,000 pounds of gunpowder. Near the barrels stood Selim, my father's favourite, whom I mentioned to you just now. He stood watch day and night, with a lance provided with a lighted slow match in his hand, and he had orders to blow up everything: kiosk, guards, women, gold, and Ali Tepelini himself, at the first signal given by my father. I remember well that the slaves, convinced of the precarious tenure in which they held their lives, passed whole days and nights in praying, crying, and groaning. As for me, I can never forget the pale complexion and black eyes of the young soldier, and whenever the angel of death summons me to another world, I am quite sure I shall recognize Selim. I cannot tell you how long we remained in this state. At that period I did not even know what time meant. Sometimes, but very rarely, my father summoned me and my mother to the terrace of the palace. These were hours of recreation for me, as I never saw anything in the dismal cavern but the gloomy countenances of the slaves and Selim's fiery lance. My father was endeavouring to pierce with his eager looks the remotest verge of the horizon, examining attentively every black speck which appeared on the lake, while my mother, reclining by his side, rested her head on his shoulder, and I played at his feet, admiring everything I saw with that unsophisticated innocence of childhood, which throws a charm round objects insignificant in themselves, but which in its eyes are invested with the greatest importance. The heights of Pindus towered above us. The castle of Yanina rose white and angular from the blue waters of the lake, and the immense masses of black vegetation, which, viewed in the distance, gave the idea of lichens clinging to the rocks, were, in reality, gigantic fir trees and myrtles. One morning my father sent for us. My mother had been crying all the night, and was very wretched. We found the Pasha calm, but paler than usual. "Take courage, Vasiliki," said he. "Today arrives the firman of the master, and my fate will be decided. If my pardon be complete, we shall return triumphant to Yanina. If the news be inauspicious, we must fly this night." "But supposing our enemy should not allow us to do so," said my mother. "Oh, make yourself easy on that head," said Ali, smiling. "Selim and his flaming lance will settle that matter. They would be glad to see me dead, but they would not like themselves to die with me." My mother only answered by sighs to consolations which she knew did not come from my father's heart. She prepared the iced water which he was in the habit of constantly drinking, for since his sojourn at the kiosk he had been parched by the most violent fever, after which she anointed his white beard with perfumed oil, and lighted his chibouk, which he sometimes smoked for hours together, quietly watching the wreaths of vapour that ascended in spiral clouds and gradually melted away in the surrounding atmosphere. Presently he made such a sudden movement that I was paralyzed with fear. Then, without taking his eyes from the object which had first attracted his attention, he asked for his telescope. My mother gave it him, and as she did so, looked whiter than the marble against which she leaned. I saw my father's hand tremble. "A boat. 2, 3, murmured my father. 4. He then arose, seizing his arms and priming his pistols. "Vasiliki," said he to my mother, trembling perceptibly, "the instant approaches which will decide everything. In the space of half an hour we shall know the Emperor's answer. Go into the cavern with Haydée." "I will not quit you," said Vasiliki. "If you die, my lord, I will die with you." "Go to Selim," cried my father. "I do, my lord," murmured my mother, determining quietly to await the approach of death. "Take away Vasiliki," said my father to the palicaires. As for me, I had been forgotten in the general confusion. I ran toward Ali Tepelini. He saw me hold out my arms to him, and he stooped down and pressed my forehead with his lips. Oh, how distinctly I remember that kiss! It was the last he ever gave me, and I feel as if it were still warm on my forehead. On descending, we saw through the lattice-work several boats which were gradually becoming more distinct to our view. At first they appeared like black specks, and now they looked like birds skimming the surface of the waves. During this time, in the kiosk at my father's feet were seated 20 palicaires, concealed from view by an angle of the wall and watching with eager eyes the arrival of the boats. They were armed with their long guns, inlaid with mother-of-pearl and silver, and cartridges in great numbers were lying scattered on the floor. My father looked at his watch, and paced up and down with a countenance expressive of the greatest anguish. This was the scene which presented itself to my view as I quitted my father after that last kiss. My mother and I traversed the gloomy passage leading to the cavern. Selim was still at his post, and smiled sadly on us as we entered. We fetched our cushions from the other end of the cavern and sat down by Selim. In great dangers the devoted ones cling to each other, and, young as I was, I quite understood that some imminent danger was hanging over our heads. Albert had often heard, not from his father, for he never spoke on the subject, but from strangers, the description of the last moments of the Vizier of Yanina. He had read different accounts of his death, But the story seemed to acquire fresh meaning from the voice and expression of the young girl, and her sympathetic accent and the melancholy expression of her countenance at once charmed and horrified him. As to Haydée, these terrible reminiscences seemed to have overpowered her for a moment, for she ceased speaking, her head leaning on her hand like a beautiful flower bowing beneath the violence of the storm, and her eyes, gazing on vacancy, indicated that she was mentally contemplating the green summit of the Pindus and the blue waters of the lake of Yanina, which, like a magic mirror, seemed to reflect the sombre picture which she sketched. Monte Cristo looked at her with an indescribable expression of interest and pity. "Go on," said the Count in the Romaic language. Haydée looked up abruptly, as if the sonorous tones of Monte Cristo's voice had awakened her from a dream, and she resumed her narrative. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and although the day was brilliant out of doors, we were enveloped in the gloomy darkness of the cavern. One single solitary light was burning there, and it appeared like a star set in a heaven of blackness. It was Selim's flaming lance. My mother was a Christian, and she prayed. Selim repeated from time to time the sacred words, "God is great." However, my mother had still some hope. As she was coming down, she thought she recognized the French officer who had been sent to Constantinople, and in whom my father placed so much confidence, for he knew that all the soldiers of the French emperor were naturally noble and generous. She advanced some steps towards the staircase and listened. "They are approaching," said she. "Perhaps they bring us peace and liberty." "What do you fear, Vasiliki?" said Selim, in a voice, at once, so gentle and yet so proud. "If they do not bring us peace, we will give them war. If they do not bring life, we will give them death." And he renewed the flame of his lance, with a gesture which made one think of Dionysus of Crete. But I, being only a little child, was terrified by his undaunted courage, which appeared to me both ferocious and senseless, and I recoiled with horror from the idea of the frightful death amidst fire and flames which probably awaited us. My mother experienced the same sensations, for I felt her tremble. "Mamma, mamma," said I, "are we really to be killed?" And at the sound of my voice, the slaves redoubled their cries and prayers and lamentations. "My child," said Vasiliki, "may God preserve you from ever wishing for that death which today you so much dread." Then, whispering to Selim, she asked what were her master's orders. "If he send me his poniard, it will signify that the Emperor's intentions are not favourable, and I am to set fire to the powder. If, on the contrary, he send me his ring, it will be a sign that the Emperor pardons him, and I am to extinguish the match and leave the magazine untouched." "My friend," said my mother, "when your master's orders arrive, if it is the poniard which he sends, instead of dispatching us by that horrible death which we both so much dread, you will mercifully kill us with the same poniard, will you not?" "Yes, Vasiliki," replied Selim tranquilly. Suddenly we heard loud cries, and listening, discerned that they were cries of joy. The name of the French officer who had been sent to Constantinople resounded on all sides amongst our palicares. It was evident that he had brought the answer of the Emperor, and that it was favourable. "And you do not remember the Frenchman's name?" said Morcerf, quite ready to aid the memory of the narrator. Monte Cristo made a sign to him to be silent. "I do not recollect it," said Haydée. The noise increased. Steps were heard approaching nearer and nearer. They were descending the steps leading to the cavern. Selim made ready his lance. Soon a figure appeared in the grey twilight at the entrance of the cave, formed by the reflection of the few rays of daylight which had found their way into this gloomy retreat. "Who are you?" cried Selim. "But whoever you may be, I charge you not to advance another step." "Long live the Emperor," said the figure. "He grants a full pardon to the Vizier Ali, and not only gives him his life, but restores to him his fortune and his possessions." My mother uttered a cry of joy, and clasped me to her bosom. "Stop," said Selim, seeing that she was about to go out. "You see, I have not yet received the ring." "True," said my mother, and she fell on her knees, at the same time holding me up towards heaven, as if she desired, while praying to God in my behalf, to raise me actually to his presence. And for the second time Haydée stopped, overcome by such violent emotion that the perspiration stood upon her pale brow, and her stifled voice seemed hardly able to find utterance, so parched and dry were her throat and lips. Monte Cristo poured a little iced water into a glass, and presented it to her, saying with a mildness in which was also a shade of command, "Courage." Haydée dried her eyes and continued. By this time our eyes, habituated to the darkness, had recognized the messenger of the Pasha. It was a friend. Selim had also recognized him, but the brave young man only acknowledged one duty, which was to obey. "In whose name do you come?" said he to him. "I come in the name of our master, Ali Tepelini." "If you come from Ali himself," said Selim, "you know what you are charged to remit to me?" "Yes," said the messenger, "and I bring you his ring." At these words he raised his hand above his head to show the token, but he was too far off, and there was not light enough to enable Selim, where he was standing, to distinguish and recognize the object presented to his view. "I do not see what you have in your hand," said Selim. "Approach, then," said the messenger, "or I will come nearer to you, if you prefer it." "I will agree to neither one nor the other," replied the young soldier. "Place the object which I desire to see in the ray of light which shines there, and retire while I examine it." "Be it so," said the envoy, and he retired, after having first deposited the token agreed on in the place pointed out to him by Selim. Oh, how our hearts palpitated, for it did indeed seem to be a ring which was placed there. But was it my father's ring? That was the question. Selim, still holding in his hand the lighted match, walked towards the opening in the cavern, and, aided by the faint light which streamed in through the mouth of the cave, picked up the token. "It is well," said he, kissing it. "It is my master's ring." And throwing the match on the ground, he trampled on it and extinguished it. The messenger uttered a cry of joy and clapped his hands. At this signal 4 soldiers of the Seraskier Kourshid suddenly appeared, and Selim fell, pierced by 5 blows. Each man had stabbed him separately, and intoxicated by their crime, though still pale with fear, they sought all over the cavern to discover if there was any fear of fire, after which they amused themselves by rolling on the bags of gold. At this moment my mother seized me in her arms, and hurrying noiselessly along numerous turnings and windings known only to ourselves, she arrived at a private staircase of the kiosk, where was a scene of frightful tumult and confusion. The lower rooms were entirely filled with Kourshid's troops, that is to say, with our enemies. Just as my mother was on the point of pushing open a small door, we heard the voice of the Pasha sounding in a loud and threatening tone. My mother applied her eye to the crack between the boards. I, luckily, found a small opening which afforded me a view of the apartment and what was passing within. "What do you want?" said my father to some people, who were holding a paper inscribed with characters of gold. "What we want," replied one, "is to communicate to you the will of His Highness. Do you see this firman?" "I do," said my father. "Well, read it. He demands your head." My father answered with a loud laugh, which was more frightful than even threats would have been, and he had not ceased when 2 reports of a pistol were heard. He had fired them himself, and killed 2 men. The Pallicares, who were prostrated at my father's feet, now sprang up and fired, and the room was filled with fire and smoke. At the same instant the firing began on the other side, and the balls penetrated the boards all round us. Oh, how noble did the Grand Vizier, my father, look at that moment, in the midst of the flying bullets, his scimitar in his hand, and his face blackened with the powder of his enemies. And how he terrified them, even then, and made them fly before him. "Selim, Selim," cried he, "guardian of the fire, do your duty." "Selim is dead," replied a voice which seemed to come from the depths of the earth, "and you are lost, Ali." At the same moment an explosion was heard, and the flooring of the room in which my father was sitting was suddenly torn up and shivered to atoms. The troops were firing from underneath. 3 or 4 Pallicares fell with their bodies literally ploughed with wounds. My father howled aloud, plunged his fingers into the holes which the balls had made, and tore up one of the planks entire. But immediately through this opening 20 more shots were fired, and the flame, rushing up like fire from the centre of a volcano, soon reached the tapestry, which it quickly devoured. In the midst of all this frightful tumult and these terrific cries, 2 reports, fearfully distinct, followed by 2 shrieks more heart-rending than all, froze me with terror. These 2 shots had mortally wounded my father, and it was he who had given utterance to these frightful cries. However, he remained standing, clinging to a window. My mother tried to force the door, that she might go and die with him, but it was fastened on the inside. All around him were lying the Pallicares, writhing in convulsive agonies, while 2 or 3 who were only slightly wounded were trying to escape by springing from the windows. At this crisis the whole floor suddenly gave way. My father fell on one knee, and at the same moment 20 hands were thrust forth, armed with sabres, pistols, and poniards. 20 blows were instantaneously directed against one man, and my father disappeared in a whirlwind of fire and smoke, kindled by these demons, and which had seemed like hell itself opening beneath his feet. I felt myself fall to the ground. My mother had fainted. Haydée's arms fell by her side, and she uttered a deep groan, at the same time looking towards the Count, as if to ask if he were satisfied with her obedience to his commands. Monte Cristo arose and approached her, took her hand and said to her in Romaic, "Calm yourself, my dear child, and take courage in remembering that there is a God who will punish traitors." "It is a frightful story, Count," said Albert, terrified at the paleness of Haydée's countenance, "and I reproach myself now for having been so cruel and thoughtless in my request." "Oh, it is nothing," said Monte Cristo. Then, patting the young girl on the head, he continued, "Haydée is very courageous, and she sometimes even finds consolation in the recital of her misfortunes." "Because, my lord," said Haydée eagerly, "my miseries recall to me the remembrance of your goodness." Albert looked at her with curiosity, for she had not yet related what he most desired to know, how she had become the slave of the Count. Haydée saw at once the same expression pervading the countenance of her 2 auditors. She exclaimed, "When my mother recovered her senses, we were before the Seraskier. 'Kill,' said she, 'but spare the honour of the widow of Ali.'" "It is not me to whom you must address yourself," said Khurshid. "To whom, then?" "To your new master." "Who and where is he?" "He is here." And Khurshid pointed out one who had more than any contributed to the death of my father, said Haydée, in a tone of chastened anger. "Then," said Albert, "you became the property of this man?" "No," replied Haydée. "He did not dare to keep us, so we were sold to some slave merchants who were going to Constantinople. We traversed Greece and arrived half dead at the imperial gates. They were surrounded by a crowd of people, who opened a way for us to pass, when suddenly my mother, having looked closely at an object which was attracting their attention, uttered a piercing cry and fell to the ground, pointing as she did so to a head which was placed over the gates, and beneath it which were inscribed these words: "This is the head of Ali Tepelini, Pasha of Yanina." I cried bitterly and tried to raise my mother from the earth, but she was dead. I was taken to the slave market and was purchased by a rich Armenian. He caused me to be instructed, gave me masters, and when I was 13 years of age he sold me to the Sultan Mahmud. "Of whom I bought her," said Monte Cristo, "as I told you, Albert, with the emerald which formed a match to the one I had made into a box for the purpose of holding my hashish pills." "Oh, you are good, you are great, my lord," said Haydée, kissing the Count's hand, "and I am very fortunate in belonging to such a master." Albert remained quite bewildered with all that he had seen and heard. "Come, finish your cup of coffee," said Monte Cristo. "The history is ended." End of chapter 77.
Chapter 78. We hear from Yanina. If Valentine could have seen the trembling step and agitated countenance of Franz when he quitted the chamber of M. Noirtier, even she would have been constrained to pity him. Villefort had only just given utterance to a few incoherent sentences, and then retired to his study, where he received about 2 hours afterwards the following letter. After all the disclosures which we made this morning, M. Noirtier de Villefort must see the utter impossibility of any alliance being formed between his family and that of M. Franz d'Épinay. M. d'Épinay must say that he is shocked and astonished that M. de Villefort, who appeared to be aware of all the circumstances detailed this morning, should not have anticipated him in this announcement. No one who had seen the magistrate at this moment, so thoroughly unnerved by the recent inauspicious combination of circumstances, would have supposed for an instant that he had anticipated the annoyance, although it certainly never had occurred to him that his father would carry candor, or rather rudeness, so far as to relate such a history. And in justice to Villefort, it must be understood that M. Noirtier, who never carried the opinion of his son on any subject, had always omitted to explain the affair to Villefort, so that he had all his life entertained the belief that General de Quesnel, or the Baron d'Épinay, as he was alternately styled, according as the speaker wished to identify him by his own family name, or by the title which he had been conferred on him, fell the victim of assassination, and not that he was killed fairly in a duel. This harsh letter, coming as it did from a man generally so polite and respectful, struck a mortal blow at the pride of Villefort. Hardly had he read the letter when his wife entered. The sudden departure of Franz, after being summoned by M. Noirtier, had so much astonished everyone that the position of Madame de Villefort, left alone with the notary and the witnesses, became every moment more embarrassing. Determined to bear it no longer, she arose and left the room, saying she would go and make some inquiries into the cause of his sudden disappearance. M. de Villefort's communications on the subject were very limited and concise. He told her, in fact, that an explanation had taken place between M. Noirtier, M. d'Épinay, and himself, and that the marriage of Valentine and Franz would consequently be broken off. This was an awkward and unpleasant thing to have to report to those who were awaiting her return in the chamber of her father-in-law. She therefore contented herself with saying that M. Noirtier, having at the commencement of the discussion been attacked by a sort of apocalyptic fit, the affair would necessarily be deferred for some days longer. This news, false as it was, following so singularly in the train of the two similar misfortunes which had so recently occurred, evidently astonished the auditors, and they retired without a word. During this time, Valentine, at once terrified and happy, after having embraced and thanked the feeble old man for thus breaking with a single blow the chain which she had been accustomed to consider as irrefragable, asked leave to retire to her own room, in order to recover her composure. Noirtier looked the permission which she solicited, but instead of going to her own room, Valentine, having once gained her liberty, entered the gallery, and opening a small door at the end of it, found herself once in the garden. In the midst of all the strange events which had crowded one on the other, an indefinable sentiment of dread had taken possession of Valentine's mind. She expected every moment that she should see Morrel appear, pale and trembling, to forbid the signing of the contract, like the Laird of Ravenswood in The Bride of Lammermoor. It was high time for her to make her appearance at the gate, for Maximilian had long awaited her coming. He had half guessed that it was going on when he saw Franz quit the cemetery with M. de Villefort. He followed M. d'Épinay, saw him enter, afterwards go out, and then re-enter with Albert in Chateau Renaud. He no longer had any doubts as to the nature of the conference. He therefore quickly went to the gate in the clover patch, prepared to hear the result of the proceedings, and very certain that Valentine would hasten to him the first moment she should be set at liberty. He was not mistaken. Peering through the crevices of the wooden partition, he soon discovered the young girl, who cast aside all her usual precautions and walked at once to the barrier. The first glance which Maximilian directed towards her entirely reassured him, and the first words she spoke made his heart bound with delight. "We are saved!" said Valentine. "Saved?" repeated Morrel, not being able to conceive such intense happiness. "By whom?" "By my grandfather. Oh, Morrel, pray love him for all his goodness to us." Morrel swore to love him with all his soul, and at that moment he could safely promise to do so, for he felt as though it were not enough to love him merely as a friend or even as a father. "But tell me, Valentine, how has it been all effected? What strange means has he used to compass this blessed end?" Valentine was on the point of relating all that had passed, but she suddenly remembered that in doing so she must reveal a terrible secret which concerned others as well as her grandfather, and she said, "At some future time I will tell you all about it." "But when will that be?" "When I am your wife." The conversation had now turned upon a topic so pleasing to Morrel that he was ready to accede to anything that Valentine thought fit to propose, and he likewise felt a piece of intelligence such as he just heard ought to be more than sufficient to content him for one day. However, he would not leave without the promise of seeing Valentine again the next night. Valentine promised all that Morrel required of her, and certainly it was less difficult now for her to believe that she should marry Maximilian than it was an hour ago to assure herself that she should not marry Franz. During the time occupied by the interview we have just detailed, Madame de Villefort had gone to visit M. Noirtier. The old man looked at her with that stern and forbidding expression which he was accustomed to receive her. "Sir," said she, "is it superfluous for me to tell you that Valentine's marriage is broken off, since it was here that the affair was concluded?" Noirtier's countenance remained immovable. "But one thing I can tell you, of which I do not think you are aware, that is, that I have always been opposed to this marriage, and that the contract was entered into entirely without my consent or approbation." Noirtier regarded his daughter-in-law with the look of a man desiring an explanation. "Now that this marriage, which I know you so much disliked, is done away with, I come to you on an errand which neither M. de Villefort nor Valentine could consistently undertake." Noirtier's eyes demanded the nature of her mission. "I come to entreat you, sir," continued Madame de Villefort, "as the only one who has the right of doing so, inasmuch as I am the only one who will receive no personal benefit from the transaction, I come to entreat you to restore, not your love, for that she is always possessed, but to restore your fortune to your granddaughter." There was a doubtful expression in Noirtier's eyes. He was evidently trying to discover the motive of this proceeding, and he could not succeed in doing so. "May I hope, sir," said Madame de Villefort, "that your intentions accord with my request?" Noirtier made a sign that they did. "In that case, sir," rejoined Madame de Villefort, "I will leave you overwhelmed with gratitude and happiness at your prompt acquiescence to my wishes." She then bowed to M. Noirtier and retired. The next day M. Noirtier sent for the notary. The first will was torn up and a second made, in which he left the whole of his fortune to Valentine, on condition that she should never be separated from him. It was then generally reported that Mademoiselle de Villefort, the heiress of the Marquis and Marchioness of Saint-Méran, had regained the good graces of her grandfather, and that she would ultimately be in possession of an income of 300,000 livres. While all the proceedings relative to the dissolution of the marriage contract were being carried out at the house of M. de Villefort, Monte Cristo had paid his visit to the Count of Monte Cristo, who, in order to lose no time in responding to M. Danglers' wishes, and at the same time to pay all due deference to his position in society, donned his uniform of lieutenant general, which he ornamented with all his crosses, and thus attired, ordered his finest horses, and drove to the Rue de la Sauve d'Antibes. Danglars was balancing his monthly accounts, and it was perhaps not the most favorable moment for finding him in his best humor. At the first sight of his old friend, Danglars assumed his majestic air, and settled himself in the easy-chair. Montcalm, usually so stiff and formal, accosted the banker in an affable and smiling manner, and feeling sure that the overture he was about to make would be well received, he did not consider it necessary to adopt any maneuvers in order to gain his end, but went at once straight to the point. "Well, Baron," said he, "here I am at last. Some time has elapsed since our plans were formed, and they are not yet executed." Montcalm paused at these words, quietly waiting until the cloud should have dispersed which gathered on the brow of Danglars, and which he attributed to his silence. But on the contrary, to his great surprise, it grew darker and darker. "To what do you allude, monsieur?" said Danglars, as if he was trying in vain to guess the possible meaning of the general's words. "Ah!" said Montcalm, "I see you are a stickler for forms, my dear sir, and you would remind me that the ceremonial rites should not be omitted. Ma foi, I beg your pardon, but as I have one son, and it is the first time I ever thought of marrying him, I am still serving my apprenticeship, you know. Come, I will reform." And Montcalm, with a forced smile, arose, and making a low bow to M. Danglars, said, "Baron, I have the honor of asking you the hand of Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars for my son, the victim Alberte de Montcalm." But Danglars, instead of receiving this address in the favorable manner which Montcalm had expected, knit his brow, and without inviting the Count, who was still standing, to take a seat, he said, "Monsieur, it will be necessary to reflect before I give you an answer." "To reflect!" said Montcalm, more and more astonished. "Have you not had enough time for reflection during the 8 years which have elapsed since this marriage was first discussed between us?" "Count," said the banker, "things are constantly occurring in the world to induce us to lay aside our most established opinions, or at all events to cause us to remodel them according to the change of circumstances, which may have placed affairs in a totally different light to that in which we first viewed them." "I do not understand you, Baron," said Montcalm. "What I mean to say is this, sir, that during the last fortnight unforeseen circumstances have occurred." "Excuse me," said Montcalm, "but it is a play we are acting." "A play?" "Yes, for it is like one. Pray let us come more to the point, and endeavor thoroughly to understand each other." "That is my desire. You have seen M. de Monte Cristo, have you not?" "I see him very often," said Danglars, drawing himself up. "He is a particular friend of mine." "Well, in one of your late conversations with him, you said that I appeared to be forgetful and irresolute concerning this marriage, did you not?" "I did say so." "Well, here I am, proving at once that I am really neither the one nor the other, by entreating you to keep your promise on that score." Danglars did not answer. "Have you so soon changed your mind," added Montcalm, "or have you only provoked my request that you may have the pleasure of seeing me humbled?" Danglars, seeing that if he continued the conversation in the same tone which he had begun it, the whole thing might turn out to be his own disadvantage, turned to Montcalm and said, "Count, you must doubtless be surprised at my reserve, and I assure you that it cost me much to act in such a manner towards you. But believe me when I say that imperative necessity has imposed the painful task upon me." "These are all so many empty words, my dear sir," said Montcalm. "They may satisfy a new acquaintance, but the Comte de Montcalm does not rank in that list, and when a man like him comes to another, recalls him to his plighted word, and this man fails to redeem the pledge, he has at least a right to exact from him good reason for so doing." Danglars was a coward, but he did not wish to appear so. He was piqued at the tone which Montcalm had just assumed. "I am not without good reason for my conduct," replied the banker. "What do you mean to say?" "I mean to say that I have good reason, but that is difficult to explain. You must be aware, at all events, that it is impossible for me to understand motives before they explain to me. But one thing at least is clear, which is, that you decline allying yourself with my family." "No, sir," said Danglars, "I merely suspend my decision, that is all." "And do you really flatter yourself that I shall yield to all your caprices, and quietly and humbly await the time of again being received into your good graces? Then, Count, if you will not wait, we must look upon these projects as if they had never been entertained. The Count bit his lips until blood almost started, to prevent the ebullition of anger which his proud and irritable temper scarcely allowed him to restrain. Understanding, however, that in the present state of things the laugh would decidedly be against him, he turned from the door, towards which he had been directing his steps, and again confronted the banker. A cloud settled on his brow, evincing decided anxiety and uneasiness, instead of the expression of offended pride which had lately reigned there. "My dear Danglars," said Montcalm, "we have been acquainted for many years, and consequently we ought to make some allowance for each other's failings. You owe me an explanation, and really it is but fair that I should know what circumstances occurred you to deprive my son of your favor." "It is from no personal ill feeling towards the Viscount. That is all I can say, sir," replied Danglars, who resumed his insolent manner as soon as he perceived that Montcalm was a little softened and calmed down. "And towards whom you bear his personal ill feeling, then?" said Montcalm, turning pale with anger. The expression of the Count's face had not remained unperceived by the banker. He fixed on him a look of greater assurance than before, and said, "You may, perhaps, be better satisfied that I should not go further into particulars." A tremor of suppressed rage shook the whole frame of the Count, and making a violent effort over himself, he said, "I have a right to insist on your giving me an explanation. Is it Madame de Montcalm who has displeased you? Is it my fortune which you find insufficient? Is it because my opinions differ from yours?" "Nothing of the kind, sir," replied Danglars. "If such had been the case, I should only have been to blame, insomuch as I was aware of all these things when I made the engagement. No, I do not seek any longer to discover the reason. I really am quite ashamed to have been the cause of your undergoing such severe self-examination. Let us drop the subject, and adopt the middle course of delay, which implies neither a rupture nor an engagement. Ma foi, there is no hurry. My daughter is only 17 years old, and your son 21. While we wait, time will be progressing. Events will succeed each other. Things which in the evening look dark and obscure appear but too clearly in the light of morning, and sometimes the utterance of one word, or the lapse of a single day, will reveal the most cruel calumnies." "Calumnies, did you say, sir?" cried Montcalm, turning livid with rage. "Does anyone dare to slander me?" "Monsieur, I told them that I considered it best to avoid all explanations." "Then, sir, am I patiently to submit to your refusal?" "Yes, sir, although I assure you the refusal is as painful for me to give as it is for you to receive, for I had reckoned on the honor of your alliance, and the breaking off of a marriage contract always injures the lady more than the gentleman." "Enough, sir," said Montcalm, "we will speak no more on the subject," and clutching his gloves in anger, he left the apartment. Danglars observed that during the whole conversation Montcalm had never once dared to ask that it was on his own account that Danglars recalled his word. That evening he had a long conference with several friends, and M. Cavalcanti, who had remained in the drawing-room with the ladies, was the last to leave the banker's house. The next morning, as soon as he awoke, Danglars asked for the newspapers. They were brought to him. He laid aside 3 or 4, and was at last fixed upon the Impartial, the paper of which the Beauchamp was the chief editor. He hastily tore off the cover, opened the journal with nervous precipitation, passed contemptuously over the Paris jottings, and arriving at the miscellaneous intelligence, stopped with a malicious smile at a paragraph headed, "We hear from Yanina." "Very good," observed Danglars, after having read the paragraph. "Here is a little article on Colonel Fernand, which, if I am not mistaken, would render the explanation which the Comte de Montcalm required of me perfectly unnecessary." At the same moment, that is, at 9 o'clock in the morning, Albert de Montcalm, dressed in a black coat buttoned up to his chin, might have been walking with a quick and agitated step in the direction of Monte Cristo's house in the Champs-Élysées. When he presented himself at the gate, the porter informed him that the Count had gone out about an hour previously. "Did he take Baptistin with him?" "No, my lord." "Call him, then. I wish to speak with him." The concierge went to seek the valet de chambre, and returned with him in an instant. "My good friend," said Albert, "I beg pardon for my intrusion, but I was anxious to know from your own mouth if your master was really out or not." "He is really out, sir," replied Baptistin. "Out, even to me?" "I know how happy my master always is to receive the Vicomte," said Baptistin, "and I should therefore never think of including him in any general order." "You are right. And now I wish to see him on an affair of great importance. Do you think it will be long before he comes in?" No, I think not, for he ordered his breakfast at 10 o'clock. Well, I will go and take a turn in the Champs-Élysées, and at 10 o'clock I will return here. Meanwhile, if the Count should come in, will you beg him not to go out again without seeing me? You may depend on my doing so, sir, said Baptistin. Albert left the cab in which he had come at the Count's door, intending to take a turn on foot. As he was passing the Allée des Vausuves, he thought he saw the Count's horses standing at Gosset's shooting gallery. As he approached and soon recognized the coachman. "Is the Count shooting in the gallery?" said Montcalm. "Yes, sir," replied the coachman. While he was speaking, Albert had heard a report of 2 or 3 pistol shots. He entered, and on his way met the waiter. "Excuse me, my lord," said the lad, "but will you not have the kindness to wait a moment?" "For what, Philip?" asked Albert, who, being a constant visitor there, did not understand this opposition to his entrance. "Because the person who is now in the gallery prefers being alone, and never practices in the presence of anyone." "Not even before you, Philip?" "Then who loads his pistol?" "His servant." "A Nubian?" "A Negro." "It is he, then." "Do you know this gentleman?" "Yes, and I am come to look for him. He is a friend of mine." "Oh, that is quite another thing, then. I will go immediately and inform him of your arrival." And Philippe, urged by his own curiosity, entered the gallery. A second afterwards, Monte Cristo appeared on the threshold. "I ask your pardon, my dear Count," said Albert, "for following you here, and I must tell you that it was not the fault of your servants that I did so. I alone am to blame for this indiscretion. I went to your house, and they told me you were out, but they expected you home at 10 o'clock for breakfast. I was walking about in order to pass away the time until 10 o'clock, when I caught sight of your carriage and horses." "What you have just said induces me to hope that you intend breakfasting with me." "No, thank you, I am thinking of other things besides breakfast just now. Perhaps we may take that meal at a later hour in worse company." "What on earth are you talking of?" "I am to fight today." "For what?" "I am going to fight." "Yes, I understand that, but what is the quarrel? People fight for all sorts of reasons, you know." I fight in the cause of honor." "Ah, that is something serious." "So serious that I come to beg you to render me a service." "What is it?" "To be my second." "That is a serious matter, and we will not discuss it here. Let us speak of nothing until we get home. Ali, bring me some water." And the Count turned up his sleeves, and passed into the little vestibule where the gentlemen were accustomed to wash their hands after shooting. "Come in, my lord," said Philippe in a low tone, "and I will show you something droll." Morcarf entered, and in place of the usual target, he saw some playing cards fixed against a wall. At a distance, Albert thought it was a complete suit, for he counted from the ace to the 10. "Aha!" said Albert. "I see you were preparing for a game of cards." "No," said the Count. "I was making a suit." "How?" said Albert. "Those are really aces and 2s which you see, but my shots have turned them into 3s, 5s, 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s. Albert approached. In fact, the bullets had actually pierced the cards in the exact places where the painted signs would have otherwise occupied, the lines and distances being as regular kept as if they had been ruled with pencil. "Diable," said Morcarf. "What would you have, my dear Viscount?" said Monte Cristo, wiping his hands on the towel which Ali had brought him. "I must occupy my leisure moments in some way or another. But come, I am waiting for you." Both men entered Monte Cristo's carriage, which in the course of a few minutes deposited them safely at number 30. Monte Cristo took Albert into his study, and pointing at a seat, placed another for himself. "Now, let us talk of this matter quietly," said the Count. "You see I am perfectly composed," said Albert. "With whom are you going to fight?" "With Beauchamp." "One of your friends?" "Of course. It is always with friends that one fights." "I suppose you have some cause of quarrel." "I have." "What has he done to you?" "There appeared in his journal last night. But wait, and read for yourself." And Albert handed over the paper to which the Count, who read as follows. "A correspondent at Yanina informs us of a fact which until now had remained in ignorance. The castle which formed the protection of the town is given up to the Turks by a French officer named Fernand, in whom the Grand Vizier, Ali Tepelini, had reposed the greatest confidence." "Well," said Monte Cristo, "what do you see in that to annoy you?" "What do I see in it?" "Yes, what does it signify to you, if the castle of Yanina was given up by a French officer? It signifies to my father, the Count of Morcarf, whose Christian name is Fernand. Did your father serve under Ali Pasha? Yes, that is to say, he fought for the independence of the Greeks, and hence arises the calumny. Oh, my dear Viscount, do talk reason. I do not desire to do otherwise. Now just tell me who the devil should know in France that the officer Ferdinand and the Count of Morcarf are one and the same person, and who cares now about Yanina, which was taken as long ago as the year 1822 or 1823? That just shows the meanness of this slander. They have allowed all this time to elapse, and then all of a sudden rake up events which have been forgotten to furnish materials for scandal, in order to tarnish the luster of our high position. I inherit my father's name, and I do not choose that the shadow of disgrace should darken it. I am going to Bucamp, in whose journal this paragraph appears, and I shall insist on his retracting the assertion before 2 witnesses. Bucamp will never retract. Then he must fight. No, he will not, for he will tell you, what is very true, that perhaps there were 50 officers in the Greek army bearing the same name. We will fight nevertheless. I will efface the blot on my father's character. My father, who was such a brave soldier, whose career was so brilliant. Oh well, he will add, we are warranted in believing that this Fernand is not the same illustrious Count of Morcarf, who also bears the same Christian name. I am determined not to be content with anything short of an entire retraction. And you intend to make him do this in the presence of 2 witnesses, do you? Yes. You do wrong. Which means, I suppose, that you refuse the service which I asked of you? You know my theory regarding duels. I told you my opinion on that subject, if you remember, when we were at Rome. Nevertheless, my dear Count, I found you this morning engaged in an occupation but little consistent with the notions you profess to entertain. Because, my dear fellow, you can understand one must never be eccentric. If one's lot is to cast among fools, it is necessary to study folly. I shall perhaps find myself one day called out by some hair-brained scamp, which has no more real cause of quarrel with me than you have with this Bucamp. He may take me to task for some foolish trifle or another. He will bring his witnesses, or will insult me in some public place, and I am expected to kill him for all that. You admit that you would fight, then? Well, if so, why do you object to my doing so? I do not say that you ought not to fight. I only say that a duel is a serious thing, and ought not to be undertaken without due reflection. Did he reflect before he insulted my father? If he spoke hastily, and owns that he did so, you ought to be satisfied. You admit that you would fight, then? Well, if so, why do you object to my doing so? I do not say that you ought not to fight. I only say that a duel is a serious thing, and ought not to be undertaken without due reflection. Did he reflect before he insulted my father? If he spoke hastily, and owns that he did so, you ought to be satisfied. Ah, my dear Count, you are far too indulgent, and you are far too exacting. Supposing, for instance, and do not be angry at what I'm going to say, well, supposing the assertion to be really true, a son ought not to submit to such a stain on his father's honor. Ma foi, we live in times when there is much to which we must submit. That is precisely the fault of the age. And do you undertake to reform it? Yes, as far as I am personally concerned. Well, you are indeed exacting, my dear fellow. Yes, I own it. Are you quite impervious to good advice? Not when it comes from a friend. And do you account me that title? Certainly I do. Well then, before going to Bucamp with your witnesses, seek further information on the subject. From whom? From Heidi. Why, what can be the use of mixing a woman up in the affair? What can she do in it? She can declare to you, for example, that your father had no hand whatever in the defeat and death of the vizier, or if by chance he had, indeed, misfortune too. I have told you, my dear Count, that I would not for one moment admit of such a proposition. You reject this means of information, then? I do, most decidedly. Then let me offer one more word of advice. Do so, then, but let it be the last. You do not wish to hear it, perhaps? On the contrary, I request it. Do not take any witnesses with you when you go to Bucamp. Visit him alone. That would be contrary to all custom. Your case is not an ordinary one. And what is your reason for advising me to go alone? Because then the affair will rest between you and Bucamp. Explain yourself. I will do so. If Bucamp be disposed to retract, you ought at least give him the opportunity of doing it of his own free will. The satisfaction to you will be the same. If, on the contrary, he refuses to do so, it will then be quite time to admit two strangers into your secret. They will not be strangers, they will be friends. Ah, but the friends of today are the enemies of tomorrow. Beauchamp, for instance. So I recommend you be prudent. Then you advise me to go alone to Beauchamp. I do, and I will tell you why. When you wish to obtain such concession from a man's self-love, you must avoid even the appearance of wishing to wound it. I believe you are right. I am glad of it. Then I will go alone. Go! But you would do better still by not going at all. That is impossible. Do so, then. It will be a wiser plan than the first which you proposed. But, if in spite of all my precautions I am at last obliged to fight, will you not be my second? My dear Viscount, said Monte Cristo gravely, you must have seen before today that at all times and all places I have been at your disposal, but the service which you have just demanded me is one which is out of my power to render you. Why? Perhaps you may know at some future period, and in the meantime I request you excuse my declining to put you in possession of my reasons. Well then, I will have Franz and Chateau Renaud. They will be the very men for it. Do so then. But if I do fight, you will surely not object to giving me a lesson or two in shooting and fencing. That, too, is impossible. What a singular being you are! You will not interfere in anything. You are right. That is the principle on which I wish to act. We will say no more about it, then. Goodbye, Count. Morcarf took his hat and left the room. He found his carriage at the door, and doing his utmost to restrain his anger, he went at once to find Beauchamp, who was in his office. It was a gloomy, dusty-looking apartment, such as journalist offices have always been from time immemorial. The servant announced M. d'Albert Morcarf. Beauchamp repeated the name to himself, as though he could scarcely believe that he had heard aright, and then gave orders for him to be admitted. Albert entered. Beauchamp uttered an exclamation of surprise on seeing his friend leap over and trample underfoot all the newspapers which were strewed about this word. This way, my dear Albert," said he, holding out his hand to the young man. "Are you out of your senses, or do you come peaceably to take this breakfast with me? Try and find a seat. There is one by that geranium, which is the only thing in the room to remind me that there are other leaves in the world besides leaves of paper." "Beauchamp," said Albert, "is it of your journal that I came to speak?" "Indeed. What do you wish to say about it?" "I desire that a statement contained in it should be rectified." "To what do you refer? But pray sit down." "Thank you," said Albert, with a cold and formal bow. "Will you now have the kindness to explain the nature of the statement which has displeased you? An announcement has been made which implicates the honor of a member of my family." "What is it?" said Beauchamp, much surprised. "Surely you must be mistaken. The story you sent from Yanina." "Yanina?" "Yes, really you appear to be totally ignorant of the cause which brings me here." "Such is really the case, I assure you, upon my honor. Baptiste, give me yesterday's paper," cried Beauchamp. "Here, I have brought mine with me," replied Albert. Beauchamp took the paper, and read the article to which Albert pointed in an undertone. "You see it is a serious annoyance," said Morcarf, when Beauchamp had finished the perusal of the paragraph. "Is the officer referred to as a relation of yours, then?" demanded the journalist. "Yes," said Albert, blushing. "Well, what do you wish me to do for you?" said Beauchamp, mildly. "My dear Beauchamp, I wish for you to contradict this statement." Beauchamp looked at Albert with a benevolent expression. "Come," said he, "this matter will want a good deal of talking over. A retraction is always a serious thing, you know. Sit down, and I will read it again." Albert resumed his seat, and Beauchamp read, with more attention than at first, the lines denounced by his friend. "Well," said Albert in a determined tone, "you see that your paper has insulted a member of my family, and I insist on a retraction being made." "You insist?" "Yes, I insist. Permit me to remind you that you are not in the chamber, my dear Viscount." "Nor do I wish to be there," replied the young man, rising. "I repeat that I am determined to have the announcement of yesterday contradicted. You have known me long enough," continued Albert, biting his lips convulsively, for he saw that Beauchamp's anger was beginning to rise. "You have been my friend, and therefore sufficiently intimate with me to be aware that I am likely to maintain my resolution on this point. If I had been your friend, Morcarf, your present manner of speaking would almost lead me to forget that I ever bore that title. But wait a moment. Do not let us get angry, or at least not yet. You are irritated and vexed. Tell me how this Fernand is related to you." "He is merely my father," said Albert. "M. Fernand Mondego, Count of Morcarf, an old soldier who has fought in 20 battles, and whose honorable scars they would denounce as badges of disgrace." "Is it your father?" said Beauchamp. "That is quite another thing." Then well can understand your indignation, my dear Albert. I will look at it again, and he read the paragraph for the third time, laying a stress on each word as he proceeded. But the paper nowhere identifies this man Fernand with your father. No, but the connection will be seen by others, and therefore I will have the article contradicted. At the words, I will, Beauchamp steadily raised his eyes to Albert's countenance, and then, gradually lowering them, he remained thoughtful for a few moments. You will retract this assertion, will you not, Beauchamp? Said Albert, with increased, though stifled anger. Yes, replied Beauchamp. Immediately? Said Albert. When I am convinced that the statement is false. What? The thing is worth looking into, and I will take pains to investigate the matter thoroughly. But what is there to investigate, sir? Said Albert, enraged beyond measure at Beauchamp's last remark. If you do not believe that it is my father, say so immediately, and if on the contrary you believe it to be him, state your reasons for doing so. Beauchamp looked at Albert with the smile which was so peculiar to him, and which in its numerous modifications served to express every varied emotion of his mind. Sir, replied he, if you should come to me with the idea of demanding satisfaction, you should have gone at once to the point, and not have entertained me with the idle conversation to which I have been patiently listening to for the past half hour. Am I to put this construction on your visit? Yes, if you will not consent to retract that infamous calumny. Wait a moment. No threats. If you please, M. Fernand Mondego, Vicomte de Montcarf, I never allow them from my enemies, and therefore shall not put up with them from my friends. You insist on my contradicting the article relating to General Fernand, an article to which, I assure you on my word of honor, I had nothing whatever to do. Yes, I insist on it, said Albert, whose mind was beginning to get bewildered with the excitement of his feelings. And if I refuse to retract, you wish to fight, do you? Said Beauchamp in a calm tone. Yes, replied Albert, raising his voice. Well, said Beauchamp, here's my answer, my dear sir. The article was not inserted by me. I am not even aware of it. But you have, by the step you have taken, called my attention to the paragraph in question, and it will remain until it has been either contradicted or confirmed by someone who has a right to do so. Sir, said Albert, rising, I will do myself the honor of sending my seconds to you, and you will be kind enough to arrange with them the place and meeting and the weapons. Certainly, my dear sir. And this evening, if you please, or tomorrow at the latest, we will meet. No, I will be on the ground at the proper time, but in my opinion, and I have a right to dictate the preliminaries, as it is I who has received the provocation, in my opinion the time ought not to be yet. I know you well skilled in management of the sword, while I am only moderately so. I know, too, that you are a good marksman, that we were about equal. I know that a duel between us two would be a serious affair, because you are brave, and I am brave also. I do not, therefore, wish to kill you, or to be killed myself without a cause. Now I am going to put a question to you, and one very much to the purpose, too. Do you insist on this retractation as so far as to kill me if I do not make it, although I have repeated more than once, and affirmed on my honor, that I was ignorant of the thing which you charge me, and although I still declare that it is impossible for me, for any one of you, to recognize the Count of Monte Cristo under the name of Fernand? I maintain my original resolution. Very well, my dear sir, then I consent to cut throats with you. But I require 3 weeks' preparation. At the end of that time I shall come and say to you, the assertion is false, and I retract it. Or the assertion is true, when I shall immediately draw the sword from its sheath, or the pistols from the case, whichever you please. 3 weeks, cried Albert. They will pass as slowly as 3 centuries when I am all in time suffering dishonor. Had you continued to remain on the amicable terms with me, I should have said, Patience, my friend, but you have constituted yourself my enemy. Therefore I say, what does that signify to me, sir? Well then, let it be 3 weeks then, said Morcarf, but remember, at the expiration of that time, no delay or subterfuge will justify you in. M. Albert de Montcarf, said Beauchamp, rising in his turn, I cannot throw you out of window for 3 weeks, that is to say, for 24 days to come, nor have any right to split my skull open till that time has elapsed. Today is the 29th of August. The 21st of September will, therefore, be the conclusion of the term agreed on. Until the time arrives, and is the advice of a gentleman, which I am about to give you, till then we will refrain from growling and barking like 2 dogs chained within sight of each other. When he had concluded his speech, Beauchamp bowed coldly to Albert, turned his back upon them, and went to the press room. Albert vented his anger on a pile of newspapers, which he sent flying all over the office by swishing them violently with his stick, after which ebullition he departed, not, however, without walking several times to the door of the press room, as if he had half a mind to enter, while Albert was lashing the front of his carriage in the same manner that he had the newspapers which were in the innocent agents of his discomfiture. As he was crossing the barrier, he perceived Morel, who was walking with a quick step and a bright eye. He was passing the Chinese baths, and appeared to have come from the direction of the Porte Saint-Martin, and was going towards the Madeleine. "Ah," said Morcarf, "there goes a happy man." It so happened Albert was not mistaken in his opinion. End of chapter 78.
Chapter 79. The Lemonade. Morrel was, in fact, very happy. Monsieur Noirtier had just sent for him, and he was in such haste to know the reason of his doing so that he had not stopped to take a cab, placing infinitely more dependence on his own 2 legs than on the 4 legs of a cab-horse. He had therefore set off at a furious rate from Rue Meslay, and was hastening with rapid strides in the direction of the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. Morrel advanced with a firm, manly tread, and poor Berrois followed him as he best might. Morrel was only 31, Berrois was 60 years of age. Morrel was deeply in love, and Berrois was dying with heat and exertion. These 2 men, thus opposed in age and interests, resembled 2 parts of a triangle, presenting the extremes of separation, yet nevertheless possessing their point of union. This point of union was Noirtier, and it was he who had just sent for Morrel with the request that the latter would lose no time in coming to him, a command which Morrel obeyed to the letter, to the great discomfiture of Berrois. On arriving at the house, Morrel was not even out of breath, for love lends wings to our desires, but Berrois, who had long forgotten what it was to love, was sorely fatigued by the expedition he had been constrained to use. The old servant introduced Morrel by a private entrance, closed the door of the study, and soon the rustling of a dress announced the arrival of Valentine. She looked marvellously beautiful in her deep mourning dress, and Morrel experienced such intense delight in gazing upon her that he felt as if he could almost have dispensed with the conversation of her grandfather. But the easy chair of the old man was heard rolling along the floor, and he soon made his appearance in the room. Noirtier acknowledged by a look of extreme kindness and benevolence the thanks which Morrel lavished on him for his timely intervention on behalf of Valentine and himself, an intervention which had saved them from despair. Morrel then cast on the invalid an interrogative look as to the new favour which he designed to bestow on him. Valentine was sitting at a little distance from them, timidly awaiting the moment when she should be obliged to speak. Noirtier fixed his eyes on her. "Am I to say what you told me?" asked Valentine. Noirtier made a sign that she was to do so. "Monsieur Morrel," said Valentine to the young man, who was regarding her with the most intense interest, "my grandfather, Monsieur Noirtier, had 1,000 things to say, which he told me 3 days ago, and now he has sent for you, that I may repeat them to you. I will repeat them then, and since he has chosen me as his interpreter, I will be faithful to the trust, and will not alter a word of his intentions." "Oh, I am listening with the greatest impatience," replied the young man. "Speak, I beg of you." Valentine cast down her eyes. This was a good omen for Morrel, for he knew that nothing but happiness could have the power of thus overcoming Valentine. "My grandfather intends leaving this house," said she, "and Berrois is looking out suitable apartments for him in another. But you, Mademoiselle de Villefort, you who are necessary to Monsieur Noirtier's happiness—" "I," interrupted Valentine, "I shall not leave my grandfather. That is an understood thing between us. My apartment will be close to his. Now, Monsieur de Villefort must either give me his consent to this plan or his refusal. In the first case I shall leave directly, and in the second I shall wait till I am of age, which will be in about 10 months. Then I shall be free. I shall have an independent fortune. And what?" demanded Morrel. "And with my grandfather's consent, I shall fulfill the promise which I have made you." Valentine pronounced these last few words in such a low tone that nothing but Morrel's intense interest in what she was saying could have enabled him to hear them. "Have I not explained your wishes, grandpapa?" said Valentine, addressing Noirtier. "Yes," looked the old man. "Once under my grandfather's roof, Monsieur Morrel can visit me in the presence of my good and worthy protector, if we still feel that the union we contemplated will be likely to ensure our future comfort and happiness." In that case, I shall expect Monsieur Morel to come and claim me at my own hands. But alas, I have heard it said that hearts inflamed by obstacles to their desire grew cold in time of security. I trust we shall never find it so in our experience." "Oh," cried Morel, almost tempted to throw himself on his knees before Noirtier and Valentine, and to adore them as two superior beings. "What have I ever done in my life to merit such unbounded happiness?" "Until that time," continued the young girl in a calm and self-possessed tone of voice, "we will conform to circumstances, and be guided by the wishes of our friends, so long as those wishes do not tend finally to separate us, in a word. And I repeat it, because it expresses all I wish to convey. We will wait." "And I swear to make all the sacrifices which this word imposes, sir," said Morel, not only with resignation, but with cheerfulness. "Therefore," continued Valentine, looking playfully at Maximilian, "no more inconsiderate actions, no more rash projects, for you surely would not wish to compromise one who from this day regards herself as destined, honourably and happily, to bear your name?" Morel looked obedience to her commands. Noirtier regarded the lovers with a look of ineffable tenderness, while Barrois, who had remained in the room in the character of a man privileged to know everything that passed, smiled on the youthful couple as he wiped the perspiration from his bald forehead. "How hot you look, my good Barrois," said Valentine. "Ah, I have been running very fast, mademoiselle, but I must do Monsieur Morel the justice to say that he ran still faster." Noirtier directed their attention to a waiter, on which was placed a decanter containing lemonade and a glass. The decanter was nearly full, with the exception of a little, which had been already drunk by Monsieur Noirtier. "Come, Barrois," said the young girl, "take some of this lemonade. I see you are coveting a good draught of it." "The fact is, mademoiselle," said Barrois, "I am dying with thirst, and since you are so kind as to offer it me, I cannot say I should at all object to drinking your health in a glass of it." "Take some then, and come back immediately." Barrois took away the waiter, and hardly was he outside the door, which in his haste he forgot to shut, than they saw him throw back his head and empty to the very dregs of the glass which Valentine had filled. Valentine and Morel were exchanging their adieux in the presence of Noirtier, when a ring was heard at the doorbell. It was the signal of a visit. Valentine looked at her watch. "It is past noon," said she, "and today is Saturday. I dare say it is the doctor, grandpapa." Noirtier looked his conviction that she was right in her supposition. "He will come in here, and Monsieur Morel had better go. Do you not think so, grandpapa?" "Yes," sighed the old man. "Barrois!" cried Valentine. "Barrois!" "I am coming, mademoiselle," replied he. "Barrois will open the door for you," said Valentine, addressing Morel. "And now remember one thing, monsieur officer, that my grandfather commands you not to take any rash or ill-advised step which would be likely to compromise our happiness." "I promised him to wait," replied Morel, "and I will wait." At this moment Barrois entered. "Who rang?" asked Valentine. "Doctor de Avrigny," said Barrois, staggering as if he would fall. "What is the matter, Barrois?" said Valentine. The old man did not answer, but looked at his master with wild staring eyes, while with his cramped hand he grasped a piece of furniture to enable him to stand upright. "He is going to fall!" cried Morel. The rigours which had attacked Barrois gradually increased. The features of the face became quite altered, and the convulsive movement of the muscles appeared to indicate the approach of a most serious nervous disorder. Noirtier, seeing Barrois in this pitiable condition, showed by his looks all the various emotions of sorrow and sympathy which can animate the heart of man. Barrois made some steps towards his master. "Ah, sir," said he, "tell me what is the matter with me. I am suffering. I cannot see. 1,000 fiery darts are piercing my brain. Ah, don't touch me, pray don't." By this time his haggard eyes had the appearance of being ready to start from their sockets. His head fell back, and the lower extremities of the body began to stiffen. Valentine uttered a cry of horror. Morel took her in his arms as if to defend her from some unknown danger. Monsieur d'Avrigny! Monsieur d'Avrigny!" cried she in a stifled voice. "Help! Help!" Berrois turned round and with a great effort stumbled a few steps, then fell at the feet of Noirtier, and resting his hand on the knee of the invalid, exclaimed, "My master! My good master!" At this moment, Monsieur de Villefort, attracted by the noise, appeared on the threshold. Morrel relaxed his hold of Valentine, and retreating to a distant corner of the room, remained half hidden behind a curtain. Pale, as if he had been gazing on a serpent, he fixed his terrified eye on the agonized sufferer. Noirtier, burning with impatience and terror, was in despair at his utter inability to help his old domestic, whom he regarded more in the light of a friend than a servant. One might, by the fearful swelling of the veins on his forehead and the contraction of the muscles around the eye, trace the terrible conflict which was going on between the living, energetic mind and the inanimate and helpless body. Berrois, his features convulsed, his eyes suffused with blood, and his head thrown back, was lying at full length, beating the floor with his hands, while his legs had become so stiff that they looked as if they would break rather than bend. A slight appearance of foam was visible around the mouth, and he breathed painfully and with extreme difficulty. Villefort seemed stupefied with astonishment, and remained gazing intently on the scene before him, without uttering a word. He had not seen Morrel. After a moment of dumb contemplation, during which his face became pale, and his hair seemed to stand on end, he sprang towards the door, crying out, "Doctor! Doctor! Come instantly, pray come!" "Madame! Madame!" cried Valentine, calling her stepmother and running upstairs to meet her. "Come quick! Quick! And bring your bottle of smelling salts with you." "What is the matter?" cried Madame de Villefort in a harsh and constrained tone. "Oh, come, come!" "But where is the doctor?" exclaimed Villefort. "Where is he?" Madame de Villefort now deliberately descended the staircase. In one hand she held her handkerchief, with which she appeared to be wiping her face, and in the other a bottle of English smelling salts. Her first look on entering the room was at Noirtier, whose face, independent of the emotion which such a scene could not fail of producing, proclaimed him to be in possession of his usual health. Her second glance was at the dying man. She turned pale, and her eye passed quickly from the servant and rested on the master. "In the name of heaven, madame," said Villefort, "where is the doctor? He was with you just now. You see, this is a fit of apoplexy, and he might be saved if he could but be bled." "Has he eaten anything lately?" asked Madame de Villefort, eluding her husband's question. "Madame," replied Valentine, "he has not even breakfasted. He has been running very fast on an errand with which my grandfather charged him, and when he returned took nothing but a glass of lemonade." "Ah," said Madame de Villefort, "why did he not take wine? Lemonade was a very bad thing for him. Grandpapa's bottle of lemonade was standing just by his side. Poor Berrois was very thirsty, and was thankful to drink anything he could find." Madame de Villefort started. Noirtier looked at her with a glance of the most profound scrutiny. "He has such a short neck," said she. "Madame," said Villefort, "I ask, where is Monsieur d'Avrigny? In God's name, answer me." "He is with Edward, who is not quite well," replied Madame de Villefort, no longer being able to avoid answering. Villefort rushed upstairs to fetch him. "Take this," said Madame de Villefort, giving her smelling bottle to Valentine. "They will, no doubt, bleed him. Therefore I will retire, for I cannot endure the sight of blood." And she followed her husband upstairs. Morrel now emerged from his hiding-place, where he had remained quite unperceived. So great had been the general confusion. "Go away as quick as you can, Maximilian," said Valentine, "and stay till I send for you. Go." Morrel looked towards Noirtier for permission to retire. The old man, who had preserved all his usual coolness, made a sign to him to do so. The young man pressed Valentine's hand to his lips, and then left the house by a back staircase. At the same moment that he quitted the room, Villefort and the doctor entered by an opposite door. Berrois was now showing signs of returning consciousness. The crisis seemed past. A low moaning was heard, and he raised himself on one knee. D'Avrigny and Villefort laid him on the couch. "What do you prescribe, doctor?" demanded Villefort. "Give me some water and ether. You have some in the house, have you not?" "Yes." "Send for some oil of turpentine and tartar emetic." Villefort immediately dispatched a messenger. "And now let everyone retire." "Must I go too?" asked Valentine timidly. "Yes, mademoiselle, you especially," replied the doctor abruptly. Valentine looked at Monsieur d'Avrigny with astonishment, kissed her grandfather on the forehead, and left the room. The doctor closed the door after her with a gloomy air. "Look, look, doctor," said Villefort. "He is quite coming round again. I really do not think, after all, it is anything of consequence." Monsieur d'Avrigny answered by a melancholy smile. "How do you feel, Barrois?" asked he. "A little better, sir." "Will you drink some of this ether and water?" "I will try, but don't touch me." "Why not?" "Because I feel that if you were only to touch me with the tip of your finger, the fit would return." "Drink." Barrois took the glass, and raising it to his purple lips, took about half of the liquid offered to him. "Where do you suffer?" asked the doctor. "Everywhere. I feel cramps over my whole body." "Do you find any dazzling sensation before the eyes?" "Yes." "And any noise in the ears?" "Frightful." "When did you first feel that?" "Just now." "Suddenly?" "Yes, like a clap of thunder." "Did you feel nothing of it yesterday or the day before?" "Nothing." "No drowsiness?" "None." "What have you eaten today?" "I have eaten nothing. I only drank a glass of my master's lemonade. That is all." And Barrois turned towards Noirtier, who, immovably fixed in his armchair, was contemplating this terrible scene without allowing a word or a movement to escape him. "Where is this lemonade?" asked the doctor eagerly. "Downstairs, in the decanter." "Where about downstairs?" "In the kitchen." "Shall I go fetch it, doctor?" inquired Villefort. "No, stay here, and try to make Barrois drink the rest of this glass of ether and water. I will go myself and fetch the lemonade." d'Avrigny bounded towards the door, flew down the back stairs, and almost knocked down Madame de Villefort in his haste, who was herself going down to the kitchen. She cried out, but d'Avrigny paid no attention to her, possessed with but one idea. He cleared the last 4 steps with a bound, and rushed into the kitchen, where he saw the decanter, about 3 parts empty and still standing on the waiter, where it had been left. He darted upon it as an eagle would seize upon its prey. Panting with loss of breath, he returned to the room he had just left. Madame de Villefort was slowly ascending the steps which led to her room. "Is this the decanter you spoke of?" asked d'Avrigny. "Yes, doctor." "Is this the same lemonade of which you partook?" "I believe so." "What did it taste like?" "It had a bitter taste." The doctor poured some drops of the lemonade into the palm of his hand and put his lips to it, and after having rinsed his mouth as a man does when he is tasting wine, he spat the liquor into the fireplace. "It is no doubt the same," said he. "Did you drink some too, Monsieur Noirtier?" "Yes." "And did you discover a bitter taste?" "Yes." "Oh, doctor!" cried Barrois, "the fit is coming on again. Oh, do something for me." The doctor flew to his patient. "That emetic, Villefort. See if it is coming." Villefort sprang into the passage, exclaiming, "The emetic! The emetic! Is it come yet?" No one answered. The most profound terror reigned throughout the house. "If I had anything by means of which I could inflate the lungs," said d'Avrigny, looking around him, "perhaps I might prevent suffocation, but there is nothing which would do. Nothing." "Oh, sir!" cried Barrois, "are you going to let me die without help? Oh, I am dying! Oh, save me!" "A pen! A pen!" said the doctor. There was one lying on the table. He endeavored to introduce it into the mouth of the patient, who, in the midst of his convulsions, was making vain attempts to vomit, but the jaws were so clinched that the pen could not pass them. This second attack was much more violent than the first, and he had slipped from the couch to the ground, where he was writhing in agony. The doctor left him in this paroxysm, knowing that he could do nothing to alleviate it, and going up to Noirtier, said abruptly, "How do you find yourself? Well?" "Yes." "Have you any weight on the chest, or does your stomach feel light and comfortable, eh?" Yes. Then you feel pretty much as you generally do after you have had the dose which I am accustomed to give you every Sunday? Yes. Did Berrois make your lemonade? Yes. Was it you who asked him to drink some of it? No. Was it Monsieur de Villefort? No. Madame? No. It was your granddaughter, then, was it not? Yes. A groan from Berrois, accompanied by a yawn which seemed to crack the very jawbones, attracted the attention of Monsieur d'Avrigny. He left Monsieur Noirtier and returned to the sick man. "Berrois," said the doctor, "can you speak?" Berrois muttered a few unintelligible words. "Try and make an effort to do so, my good man," said d'Avrigny. Berrois reopened his bloodshot eyes. "Who made the lemonade?" "I did." "Did you bring it to your master directly it was made?" "No." "You left it somewhere, then, in the meantime?" "Yes, I left it in the pantry because I was called away." "Who brought it into this room, then?" "Mademoiselle Valentine." d'Avrigny struck his forehead with his hand. "Gracious heaven!" exclaimed he. "Doctor, doctor!" cried Berrois, who felt another fit coming. "Will they never bring that emetic?" asked the doctor. "Here is a glass with one already prepared," said Villefort, entering the room. "Who prepared it?" "The chemist who came here with me." "Drink it," said the doctor to Berrois. "Impossible, doctor. It is too late. My throat is closing up. I am choking. Oh, my heart! Ah, my head! Oh, what agony! Shall I suffer like this long?" "No, no, friend," replied the doctor. "You will soon cease to suffer." "Ah, I understand you," said the unhappy man. "My God, have mercy upon me." And uttering a fearful cry, Berrois fell back as if he had been struck by lightning. d'Avrigny put his hands to his heart and placed a glass before his lips. "Well," said Villefort, "go to the kitchen and get me some syrup of violets." Villefort went immediately. "Do not be alarmed, Monsieur Noirtier," said d'Avrigny. "I am going to take my patient into the next room to bleed him. This sort of attack is very frightful to witness." And taking Berrois under the arms, he dragged him into the adjoining room. But almost immediately he returned to fetch the lemonade. Noirtier closed Lid's right eye. "You want Valentine, do you not? I will tell them to send her to you." Villefort returned, and d'Avrigny met him in the passage. "Well, how is he now?" asked he. "Come in here," said d'Avrigny, and he took him into the chamber where the sick man lay. "Is he still in a fit?" said the procureur. "He is dead." Villefort drew back a few steps, and clasping his hands exclaimed with real amazement and sympathy, "Dead! And so soon, too!" "Yes, it is very soon," said the doctor, looking at the corpse before him. "But that ought not to astonish you. Monsieur and Madame de Saint-Méran died as soon. People die very suddenly in your house, Monsieur de Villefort." "What?" cried the magistrate with an accent of horror and consternation. "Are you still harping on the terrible idea?" "Still, sir, and I shall always do so," replied d'Avrigny, "for it has never for one instant ceased to retain possession of my mind, and that you may be quite sure I am not mistaken this time. Listen well to what I am going to say, Monsieur de Villefort." The magistrate trembled convulsively. "There is a poison which destroys life almost without leaving any perceptible traces. I know it well. I have studied it in all its forms and in the effects which it produces. I recognize the presence of this poison in the case of poor Berrois as well as in that of Madame de Saint-Méran. There is a way of detecting its presence. It restores the blue color of litmus paper reddened by an acid, and it turns syrup of violets green. We have no litmus paper, but see, here they come with the syrup of violets." The doctor was right. Steps were heard in the passage. Monsieur d'Avrigny opened the door and took from the hands of the chambermaid a cup which contained 2 or 3 spoonfuls of the syrup. He then carefully closed the door. "Look," he said to the procureur, whose heart beat so loudly that it might almost be heard. "Here is in this cup some syrup of violets, and this decanter contains the remainder of the lemonade, of which Monsieur Noirtier and Berrois partook. If the lemonade be pure and inoffensive, the syrup will retain its color. If, on the contrary, the lemonade be drugged with poison, the syrup will become green. Look closely." The doctor then slowly poured some drops of the lemonade from the decanter into the cup. and in an instant a light, cloudy sediment began to form at the bottom of the cup. This sediment first took a blue shade, then from the colour of sapphire it passed to that of opal, and from opal to emerald. Arrived at this last hue, it changed no more. The result of the experiment left no doubt whatever on the mind. "The unfortunate Barrois has been poisoned," said d'Avrigny, "and I will maintain this assertion before God and man." Villefort said nothing, but he clasped his hands, opened his haggard eyes, and, overcome with his emotion, sank into a chair. End of chapter 79.
Chapter 80. The Accusation. M. d'Avrigny soon restored the magistrate to consciousness, who looked like a second corpse in that chamber of death. "Oh, death is in my house," cried Villefort. "Say, rather, crime," replied the doctor. "M. d'Avrigny," cried Villefort, "I cannot tell you all I feel at this moment. Terror, grief, madness." "Yes," said M. d'Avrigny, with an imposing calmness, "but I think it is now time to act. I think it is time to stop this torrent of mortality. I can no longer bear to be in possession of these secrets without the hope of seeing their victims in society generally revenged." Villefort cast a gloomy look around him. "In my house," murmured he, "in my house." "Come, magistrate," said M. d'Avrigny, "show yourself a man. As an interpreter of the law, do honor to your profession by sacrificing your selfish interests to it." "You make me shudder, doctor. Do you talk of a sacrifice?" "I do." "Do you suspect anyone?" "I suspect no one. Death raps at your door. It enters, it goes, not blindfolded, but circumspectly from room to room. Well, I follow its course. I track its passage. I adopt the wisdom of the ancients, and feel my way, for my friendship for your family and my respect for you are a twofold bandage over my eyes. Well, oh, speak, speak, doctor. I shall have courage." "Well, sir, you have in your establishment, or in your family, perhaps, one of the frightful monstrosities of which each country produces only one. Locusta and Agrippina, living at the same time, were an exception, and proved the determination of Providence to effect the entire ruin of the Roman Empire, sullied by so many crimes. Brunhilde and Fredegonde were the results of the painful struggle of civilization in its infancy, when man was learning to control mind, were even by an emissary from the realms of darkness. All these women had been, or were, beautiful. The same flower of innocence had flourished, or was still flourishing on their brow, that is seen on the brow of this culprit in your house." Villefort shrieked, clasped his hands, and looked at the doctor with a supplicating air, but the latter went on without pity. "Seek whom the crime will profit," says an axiom of jurisprudence. "Doctor," cried Villefort, "alas, doctor! How often has a man's justice been deceived by these fatal words? I know not why, but I feel that this crime—" "You acknowledge, then, the existence of the crime?" "Yes, I see too plainly that it does exist, but it seems that it is intended to affect me personally. I fear an attack myself, after all these disasters." "Oh, man!" murmured d'Avrigny, "the most selfish of all animals, the most personal of all creatures, who believes the earth turns, the sun shines, and death strikes for him alone, an ant cursing God from the top of a blade of grass. And those who have lost their lives lost nothing? M. de Saint-Méran, Madame de Saint-Méran, M. Noirtier." "How? M. Noirtier?" "Yes. Think you it was the poor servant's life was coveted? No, no, like Shakespeare's Polonius, he died for another. It was Noirtier the lemonade was intended for. It is Noirtier, logically speaking, who drank it. The other drank it only by accident, and although Barrois is dead, it was Noirtier whose death was wished for." But why did it not kill my father?" "I told you one evening in the garden after Madame de Saint-Méran's death, because his system is accustomed to that very poison, and the dose was trifling to him, which would be fatal to another. Because no one knows, not even the assassin, that for the last 12 months I have given M. Noirtier brucine for his paralytic affection, while the assassin is not ignorant, and for he has proved that brucine is a violent poison."
"Oh, have pity! Have pity!" murmured Villefort, wringing his hands. "Follow the culprit's steps. He first kills M. de Saint-Méran." "Oh, doctor!" "I would swear to it. What I heard of his systems agrees too well with what I have seen in other cases." Villefort ceased to contend. He only groaned. "He first kills M. de Saint-Méran," repeated the doctor. "Then Madame de Saint-Méran, a double fortune to inherit." Villefort wiped the perspiration from his forehead. "Listen attentively." Alas," stammered Villefort, "I do not lose a single word." "M. Noirtier," resumed M. d'Avrigny in the same pitiless tone, "M. Noirtier had once made a will against you, against your family, in favor of the poor. In fact, M. Noirtier is spared, because nothing is expected from him. But he has no sooner destroyed his first will and made a second, than for fear he should make a third, he is struck down. The will was made the day before yesterday, I believe. You see, there has been no time lost." "Oh, mercy, M. d'Avrigny!" "No mercy, sir. The physician has a sacred mission on earth, and to fulfill it, he begins at the source of life, and goes down to the mysterious darkness of the tomb. And when crime has been committed, and God, doubtless in anger, turns away his face, it is for the physician to bring the culprit to justice." "Have mercy on my child, sir," murmured Villefort. "You see, it is yourself who have first named her. You, her father." "Have pity on Valentine. Listen, it is impossible. I would as willingly accuse myself. Valentine, whose heart is pure as a diamond or a lily." "No pity, procureur. The crime is pregnant. Mademoiselle herself picked all the medicines which were sent to M. de Saint-Méran, and M. de Saint-Méran is dead. Mademoiselle de Villefort prepared all the cooling draughts which Madame de Saint-Méran took, and Madame de Saint-Méran is dead. Mademoiselle de Villefort took from the hands of Barros, who was sent out the lemonade to which M. Noirtier had every morning, and he has escaped by a miracle. Mademoiselle de Villefort is the culprit. She is the poisoner. To you, as the king's attorney, I denounce Mademoiselle de Villefort. Do your duty." "Doctor, I can resist no longer. I can no longer defend myself. I believe you, but, for pity's sake, spare my life, my honor." "M. de Villefort," replied the doctor with increased vehemence, "there are occasions when I dispense with all foolish human circumspection. If your daughter had committed only one crime, and I saw her meditating another, I would say, warn her, punish her. Let her pass the remainder of her life in a convent, weeping and praying. If she had committed 2 crimes, I would say, here, M. de Villefort, is a poison that the prisoner is not acquainted with, one that has no known antidote, quick as thought, rapid as lightning, mortal as the thunderbolt. Give her that poison, recommending her soul to God, and save your honor and your life, for it is yours she aims at, and I can picture her approaching your pillow with her hypocritical smiles and her sweet exhortations. Woe to you, M. de Villefort, if you do not strike first. This is what I would say if she had only killed 2 persons, but she has seen 3 deaths, has contemplated 3 murdered persons, has knelt by 3 corpses. To the scaffold with the poisoner. To the scaffold. Do you talk of your honor? Do what I tell you, and immortality awaits you." Villefort fell upon his knees. "Listen," said he, "I have not the strength of mind you have, or rather that which you would not have. If instead of my daughter Valentine, your daughter Madeleine were concerned." The doctor turned pale. "Doctor, every son of woman is born to suffer and die. I am content to suffer and await death." "Beware," said M. d'Avrigny. "It may come slowly. You will see it approach after having struck your father, your wife, perhaps your son." Villefort, suffocating, pressed the doctor's arm. "Listen," cried he. "Pity me! Help me! No, my daughter is not guilty. If you drag us both before a tribunal, I will still say, 'No, my daughter is not guilty. There is no crime in my house.' I will not acknowledge a crime in my house, for when a crime enters a dwelling, it is like death. It does not come alone. Listen, what does it signify to you if I am murdered? Are you my friend? Are you a man? Have you a heart? No, you are a physician. Well, I will tell you not to drag my daughter before a tribunal and give her up to the executioner. The bare idea would kill me, would drive me like a madman to dig my heart out with my fingernails. And if you were mistaken, doctor, if it were not my daughter, if I should come one day, pale as a spectre, and to say to you, 'Assassin, you have killed my child!' Hold! If that should happen, though I am a Christian, M. d'Avrigny, I should kill myself. Well, said the doctor, after a moment's silence, I will wait. Villefort looked at him as if he had doubted his words. Only, continued M. d'Avrigny, with a slow and solemn tone, if anyone falls ill in your house, if you feel yourself attacked, do not send for me, for I will come no more. I will consent to share this dreadful secret with you, but I will not allow shame and remorse to grow and increase in my conscience, as crime and misery will in your house. Then you abandon me, doctor? Yes, for I can follow you no farther, and I only stop at the foot of the scaffold. Some further discovery will be made, which will bring this dreadful tragedy to a close. Adieu. I entreat you, doctor. All the horrors that disturb my thoughts make your house odious and fatal. Adieu, sir. One word, one single word more, doctor. You go, leaving me in all the horror of my situation, after increasing it by what you have revealed to me. But what will be reported of the sudden death of the poor old servant? True, said M. Avrigny. We will return. The doctor went out first, followed by M. de Villefort. The terrified servants were on the stairs and in the passage where the doctor would pass. Sir, said d'Avrigny to Villefort, so loud that all might hear, poor Barreau has led too sedentary a life of late, accustomed formerly to ride on horseback or in the carriage to the four corners of Europe. The monotonous walk around that armchair has killed him. His blood has thickened. He was stout, had a short, thick neck. He was attacked with apoplexy, and I was called in too late. By the way, added he in a low tone, take care to throw away that cup of syrup and violets in the ashes. The doctor, without shaking hands with Villefort, without adding a word to what he said, went out, amid the tears and lamentations of the whole household. The same evening, all Villefort's servants, who had assembled in the kitchen, and had a long consultation, came to tell Madame de Villefort that they wished to leave. No entreaty, no proposition of increased wages, could induce them to remain. To every argument they replied, "We must go, for death is in this house." They all left, in spite of prayers and entreaties, testifying their regret to leaving so good a master and mistress, and especially Mademoiselle Valentine, so good, so kind, and so gentle. Villefort looked at Valentine as they said this. She was in tears, and, strange as it was, in spite of the emotion she felt at the sight of those tears, he looked also at Madame de Villefort, and it appeared to him as if a slight gloomy smile had passed her thin lips, like a meteor seen passing inauspiciously between two clouds in a stormy sky. End of chapter